class. All right, welcome everyone. Welcome to the Fractal University, fractalu.com. This is Dan Winter, online to the world, so to speak, or at least those who are interested in joining us. We hope this is going to be a lot of fun. This is an experiment in sharing. First, we will have a little bit of attention to logistics here, just to see that everyone did get their welcome letter for Fractal University. Your welcome letter to Fractal University included the private link for the complete color PDF of my new book, and also notes about the discount for the imploder.com and the DVDs and book and Star Mother kit and geometric modeling tools, and invites to the Therify plasma system, etc. So, and remember that when you're join fractalu.com, the communications are via your account at learnitlive.com, so you get your notes from our project at the university direct through your account at learnitlive.com, and signing up there is free. So that's just a little bit about housekeeping. And remember that with your registration for this class, you have free invite to the next class in this subject in about 2 months. Also, if you want to attend other classes and you have economic challenges, feel free to contact me, Dan Winter, email info@fractalfield.com. And I'm very available to you and happy to share. So unless there's any issues at the moment about logistics and technical problems, everybody's with me? Can you hear me okay? All right. So what we're going to do now is actually outline a core physics principle of fractal field theory. This is intended to be basic high school, early college level science to understand a new electric field theory, which is a kind of unified field theory based on fractality, which has great implications for science and technology. Get the right screen here. There we go. Okay. So the outline we shared with this course, the first question we said was how fractal field physics was discovered. Let's point out that fractality is so well known and described in mathematics, and one of its key features is infinite compressibility. So the only form of infinite compressibility known in mathematics is fractality. That means you can zoom in forever, as you well know, like ferns and pine cones and onions. You can zoom in forever and you always see the same thing. That's called infinite compression. And mathematics is quite clear that fractality is the only form of infinite compressibility. And that has been applied to some extent to fractal data compression, which is very breakthrough for computers. Fractal data compression, notably, while having very high leverage, had issues about CPU horsepower required, and there are many interesting conversations going on about breakthrough solutions to fractal data compression, which is relevant to what we're discussing now. But our focus right now is on fractal field theory. And what appears clear to me is that as an electrical engineer, I believe it is true that until my work, no one had tried to describe what is a fractal electric field. I believe if I understand the descriptions of Einstein's work well, and I don't claim to be an expert on that, but I believe that Einstein did in fact say that if he understood infinite compression, he would have had the solution to his unified field, which eluded him. Unfortunately, as we kind of joke about this, no one ever told Einstein what a fractal was, or he might have thought about what a fractal electric field would be. It has become my view that electric phase conjugation, optical phase conjugation, based on golden mean ratio, wave mechanics, is in fact the solution to that problem, the solution to infinite compression, and therefore a fractal field, and therefore the unified field, and therefore the cause of gravity. Now that's a big and ambitious and brave and bold and somewhat audacious statement, but let me see what I can do as an electrical engineer trying to be a physicist to defend that statement, that we can show that phase conjugation by golden ratio is the solution to what a fractal field is. So first, we developed some mathematics to prove that golden mean ratio was the solution to constructive interference in general. Now, if we could prove that constructive wave interference was optimized by golden mean ratio, then in my view, logically, it would follow that golden mean ratio is the solution to non-destructive compression, and hence Einstein's dilemma, infinite non-destructive compression. And by the way, I should say that when I say infinite compression, we actually believe there is a bit of a limit condition that at Planck dimensions, the compression results in a different kind of acceleration. We're going to talk about that. So there's a bit of a caveat here to the hypothesis that it is in fact infinite compression, because there is a bit of a turning point at Planck dimensions that we're going to discuss. But back to what we were just thinking about, which is the basic defense of this idea that golden mean ratio is the solution to constructive interference. Because if we could prove that golden mean ratio is the solution to constructive wave interference in general, then we'd be able to prove that golden mean ratio is the solution to constructive compression in general. If we can do that, Einstein pretty much announced that infinite constructive compression was the unified field, in a manner of speaking, because charge being infinitely compressed was his way of talking about gravity, and it's my way of talking about gravity, and we'll explain in a moment how compression becomes acceleration. So first, very simply, I went to friends who were mathematicians, and that is specifically Martin Jones and Bill Donovan, and we published the article, which you're looking at a piece of here. It's fractalfield.com/mathematics of fusion, in which first we tried to make the simple case that golden mean ratio is the provable wave mechanics solution to constructive wave interference. Remember, previous to this, we had shown that if you wrote a computer program here, and I'm bringing this screen up, I see that it takes a second to reach your screen. We had shown here in this graphic that if you wrote a computer program to simulate wave interference at all possible ratios and then summated how much of that interference was constructive versus destructive, you get this resulting graph. This was done at my suggestion. So if you take a large number of frequencies at powers of 2 octave ratio, the net power output of that recursive interference based on octaves is this peak right here. I don't know if you can see it on the right. It's labeled octave. And so you see by the fact that this white peak goes down here, this was evidence in the summation that if you interfere a large number of waves at octave ratios, powers of 2 ratio, you get maximum destructive wave interference. Now this is not intuitive. We believe we have proof that the octave is the best way to destroy wave interference. Octaves are destructive wave interference. And this actually relates to the fact that cubic structures are actually destructive wave interference for charge, which we believe is implicated in Feng Shui, for example, where a right angle is considered evil in Feng Shui. We believe it's because the capacitive interference geometry, powers of 2, is destructive wave interference, and therefore also stressful in astrology. And we'll talk more about that in terms of how charge interference is the issue of life, constructive charge interference. Now, we're not saying that tetracubic octave-based geometries are evil here. No, nature uses them for a very particular purpose, and that is to isolate charge, hence stasis, stored charge. So it makes sense now that tetracubic structures, a hexagram, which is a shadow of a cube, for example, is an excellent way to store and isolate charge, but a very, very bad way to distribute charge. And understanding that fundamental idea, based on the fact that octaves are destructive wave interference, is very helpful to chemistry, where you're learning that hexagonal structures are often isolating chemical reactions, isolating charge, whereas pentagonal structures, golden ratio based, are doing the opposite. They're distributing charge. So charge isolation versus charge distribution is a difference between an octave ratio and a golden mean ratio. And that is going to have very profound implications as we proceed with our course. we're going to say that golden mean ratio is the solution to constructive wave interference, and therefore efficient charge distribution, and therefore life and lots of the magic stuff we're going to be talking about. A little drink of water here. So on this graph here, in the computer simulation of wave interference on the top here, this peak, you can see my little arrow pointing here, that if you take a large number of waves and use a computer to simulate how they would interfere, if the waves are at golden mean ratio, you produce, provably, the maximum amount of constructive, not destructive, wave interference. This is what we showed. This is what we showed with this software emulation. So we had this some years ago, and with the Mathematics of Fusion article, we wanted to prove this in wave theory. And so that we have here. I won't be low at this point, but at fractalfield.com/mathematics of fusion, thanks to Martin Jones, we were able to conclusively show that waves in a line, in one single line, create maximum constructive wave interference if they are in golden ratio. That was the first thing he did, Martin Jones did in this article. And he did this here. Let me see if I can bring up that part of the article. Here, yeah. By modeling with a one-dimensional compression, free particles moving in a line, he used the wave equations to show that if you simply put waves in a line and had them interfere at golden ratio, you would produce maximum constructive interference. And then further by implication in this article, I think somebody there needs to mute their microphone. If you have a little noise in your background, try to mute your microphone if you'd be so kind. Thank you. Feel free to ask questions in the chat window. So we then, by extrapolation, took a chart I did years ago here in this article on the Star Mother kit. This is our little Star Mother kit here, which we now believe is quite clearly a model of the radii of the electron shells of hydrogen. So if you take the nesting of the radii of hydrogen, you get this geometry, which is a stellated dodecahedron, literally a golden mean ratio stellated pent within pent, dodeca within dodeca. Quite literally, in my view, the only possible three-dimensional fractal, which we will show, we believe is a model of the wave geometry of hydrogen by a new equation that I wrote, we'll discuss in a moment. And so, indeed, this only possible three-dimensional fractal, the nesting of dodeca E cosa, is a primary example, and we have the kit here, of what I believe is a fractal electric field, a primary example of which would be the structure of hydrogen itself. There are lots of golden mean ratios in the structure of hydrogen. We'll talk more about that. But as it applies to this mathematics we just developed, if you take that, I'm scrolling up rather quickly here in these pictures, I'm going down to a particular part of this page here. When I first developed the Star Mother kit, I showed that if you take the vertex of a cube here in the center, and you assign the x, y, and z coordinate of all the vertex of a cube as 1, 1, 1, x, y, and z, which is a pretty simple thing to do, then the vertex of the octahedron in that are here, 0, 1, 0, 1, 1, 0, 0, and so all 1s and 0s. Very simple, which is 1 power of 1. But then, when you embed that cube in a dodecahedron, which most of you are familiar with, you just tilt the cube at 32 degrees and rotate and blink 5 times, Dorothy, and you have a dodecahedron. And so 5 cubes fit in the dodeca. It's a famous conversation. We can talk about that later. But the vertex of the dodecahedron, that cube fits perfectly inside of, look here at what the vertex are. X, Y, and Z coordinate. 0.618, 1.618, 0. 0.618, 1.618, 0. Minus and plus. So 0, 0.618, and 1.618 are the coordinates of every vertex in that dodecahedron. And further, the icosahedron here, that embeds in perfectly, if you stellate the edges of the dodeca, extend each edge by straight line to produce the icosa outside the dodeca. And you can do that infinitely, the interdigitation of the dodecacosa. You see here that the vertex of the icosahedron are also simple multiples of golden ratio, 2.6180, 1.618, these numbers right here. So the point being that when you make this model, the Star Mother kit, which is simply has this tetra cube, you see this green, there's two tetra here that are green, and there's a red vertex octa in the center, and here's the cube. When you embed that cube in this dodecahedron, you have the all 0.618 relations in that dodecahedron. Then you extend the edges of that dodeca straight out to this icosa, and you still have golden ratio for each x, y, and z coordinate, and ditto for the next dodeca. And you can do dodecacosa infinitely forever in a 3D fractal. And the x, y, and z coordinate of every vertex is going to simply be a whole number multiple of golden ratio. That means that every line on every axis of symmetry out from center of this structure, hydrogen for example, is going to be that same line that we just proved is maximum constructive interference in a line. In other words, every line going through a vertex in this thing pointing towards center, and we have lots of animations of that, you've seen them all over our website, the 12 light cones that nest to make a dodeca, that every line going down the vertex array towards center in an axis of symmetry is a simple series of golden mean ratio edge lengths on a line. So now we have the wave mechanic proof that not only do golden mean ratio wave mechanics on a line create maximum constructive interference, but because the 3D fractal that is the dodecacosa stellation, the Merkaba, Ezekiel's Wheels, City of Revelation, lots of names for this thing, is also infinite constructive wave interference in 3D, namely implosive compression. So maybe I belabored that point a little bit, but essentially what we're saying is that golden mean ratio in 3D allows perfect constructive interference in this form. Now, I say that that creates implosive negentropic collapse called phase conjugate. But I need to explain and prove that to you in gentle and delicate terms, which is what I hope to do next. So, that was one point. Number two on our little outline of tonight's course here is, why is there a frequency key signature that defines fractality in space and time? Remember, that was the title of the book, which is the centerpiece of this course, Fractal Space-Time, which is at this link, the intro to that book, fractalfield.com/fractalspacetime. And each person here hopefully received their private link to the full online color PDF copy of that book, which was a bonus of this course. So, in that book, the central thesis is my new equation, which now I'm grateful that Mark Rohrbaugh and friends are helping me with, and this is the picture that goes with the central equation in that book. So hopefully you're seeing the picture. You see the little red circle here. You're supposed to imagine this red circle as the symbol for the Tao. And inside that red circle, when you make the symbol for the Tao, you draw a sine wave in the center of a circle, and you have the symbol for the Tao. In this case, the length in time, the length and time of that sine wave at the center of that circle is Planck length and time. Now, most of my work on fractal spacetime is based on a new insight that I had, that is, if golden mean ratio phase conjugation, optimized constructive wave interference, is the solution to implosion, compression, negentropy, fractality, and all centripetal forces, that the key signature of all of that implosive and electronegativity would then be Planck length and time. The logic for that is simple, and Nassim appropriately uses a similar logic, that if you look around the universe, a lot of things change. I mean, you know, if you get a signal from a couple thousand light years away, a lot of things change, redshift and dot, dot, dot. But one thing that never changes is Planck length and time. Planck length and time is simply a unit of wavelength and wave time into which every wave that physics has ever measured divides evenly. In other words, it is the musical fundamental, the musical key signature of all of mass, all of matter. Every wave that physics has ever measured divides evenly into Planck length and time. So it appears the universe does agree on a few things, and one of that is the musical key signature of the universe, namely Planck. So we have a lot of agreement here. No physicist would disagree with that statement. The new information is if you take that musical key signature and you multiply it by whole number powers, integer exponents, of golden mean ratio, you get almost every negentropic phenomena, self-organizing life force that we know of. And that is my work in a nutshell, that statement. That you take Planck length and time, exact whole number multiples golden mean ratio, powers golden mean, you get all kinds of incredible coincidences about self-organizing phenomena. Photosynthesis, duration of Earth year, Venus year, frequencies and dimensions of hydrogen, Schumann harmonics, brainwave harmonics, implosion. Cool stuff. You get a clue to what is life, what is negentropy, what is self-organization. And that's what we want to talk about and explain as fractal space-time right now. So the picture here uses a graphic to make that visual. So when I said golden mean ratio is how you make phase conjugation, we always say, well, if you want to visualize that, imagine two pine cones kissing noses. And that's what this is. You see this picture. This is a pine cone here, and this is a pine cone here. And they're kissing noses at the Planck dimension, the little red circle in the middle. And the peaks of each wave along the pine cone is exactly what Hermes calls the caduceus. Hence, this is a very hermetic science we're discussing tonight. And in physics, I believe the caduceus is exactly what is called conjugation of phases. And by conjugation, we specifically mean recursive adding and multiplying. And it's even intuitively obvious that since golden mean ratio is the solution to both an arithmetic progressions of adding waves and a geometric progression, a progression of multiplying waves, recursive adding is multiplying. This is the way you say golden ratio is the solution to both being, the only solution of being both a geometric and arithmetic progression. So it makes sense that golden mean ratio is the solution to adding and multiplying. No one would argue with that. But when you add and multiply recursively, that's called conjugating. Hence, phase conjugation. This gets us into some very interesting territory because phase conjugation in optics has been proven to be responsible for negentropy and self-organization. So if we can prove that golden mean ratio optimizes phase conjugation, and I think I'm doing that here tonight, then we have a key to self-organization and negentropy and some predictions for what optics should be doing with golden mean ratio, wavelength in light. For example, when my friend Bob Dratch proved that, Bob Zawada proved that golden mean ratio color wavelengths were the most non-destructive way to send lasers into the body to switch on and off cancer medicines. But we'll get there later. So here is these peaks on this cascade. See these little red lines here? And these are golden mean ratio multiplications of Planck length and time. And they land us on a prediction of the key signature of most self-organizing phenomena like geometry of hydrogen, geometry of photosynthesis, brainwave geometry of bliss, the harmonics of the Schumann resonance, the sacrocranial tidal frequencies, the ear-ringing harmonics heard by meditators, the duration of the Earth year and Venus year, the frequencies that Elizabeth Rauscher and Prieuré used for bioactive fields and healing and pain elimination, and lots of cool stuff. This becomes a key signature for bioactive, that is, healing electric fields. So now we're going to play with those examples. Let me just see if we have any questions so far. Lisa says it's showing two vortices here, but are we actually talking about several vortexes in three directions phase conjugating? Good question, Lisa. Originally, when phase conjugation was discovered in optics, they called it four-wave mixing. Let me see if I have a picture of that handy. I should have a picture of that handy. That if you, the way they do it in optics, they showed four light cones mixing, two opposing lasers that would then converge and create a zone where two other light beams would, here, I do have the picture. Okay, bring me up picture to answer Lisa's question. So Lisa's question basically is, how many pine cones are kissing? Good question. And this is a picture of what I believe is happening in the classic physics of phase conjugate optics called four-wave mixing. So in this picture, imagine the top and the bottom vortex are the precisely aligned two opposing lasers that start phase conjugate optics. You get them lined up perfectly, and then right in the center, you put what's called a phase conjugate mirror, a high dielectric barium-strontium titanate, for example, that produces that bounce zone that I believe mutates the phase conjugating optical wave and allows them to interfere in a way that produces golden mean ratio from the octaves, hence phase conjugate. So we believe we have some clues to what makes a phase conjugate mirror work molecularly, but that's more advanced here. We're trying to answer Lisa's question. So the top and bottom are opposing lasers, two light cones. But then from the side, if you bounce another light beam into the phase conjugate mirror at the center, imagine that's the right and left lighter cones here in this picture called tetraflower, that if you bounce a third laser or a third light beam on there, it will bounce back not at the complement or supplement angle, but it will return back to where it came from in what they call in physics time reversal. Time reversal has some very interesting qualities we want to talk about anyway tonight. Let's see how far we get before we get ourselves all tired out with the physics. It's supposed to be fun, remember. So, no, but there's some really cool things that happen in the phase conjugate mirror, like I will phase conjugate back to you in the near past, is the way Bob Zawada, the laser physicist, had his message on his answering machine. What did he mean by that? Well, what he meant by that was that when that third light beam hit the phase conjugate mirror in the center, four-wave mixing here, it bounced off not in such a way that it returned to its condition of greatest order. And so I say, effectively, time reversal has a great limitation in what we've measured in physics, in that you can only go back to increased order and not decreased order, called neg entropy. The opposite of entropy. Entropy is moving toward disorder, neg entropy, moving toward order, which is the title of my book, or subtitle, Origins of All Biologic Neg Entropy. You did this with golden mean ratio, you create biologic neg entropy. And I'm trying to explain here that there's a very interesting condition to what's been measured in time reversal in physics. That is, you can only go back to increased order and not disorder, which is going to have profound implications when later we look at how the Therify phase conjugate plasma works to take you back. It's very interesting. Practically, it means that you can time reverse rusted steel back to unrusted, but not the reverse. We're going to be thinking about that more, but we don't want to wax too poetic here. We wanted to answer Lisa's question. So, Lisa, we got here in the picture, I got four light cones mixing. Four-wave mixing is what it's called, and that's how phase conjugate optics courses at university are taught, with the picture of four lasers having four pine cones kissing. But I say that when you stabilize that cube of vortex in all faces, which would actually be six potentially, that then what happens at the center is the cube embeds precisely in a phase conjugate structure in the case of optics, barium-strontium titanate, and you embed the dodeca in the cube, you produce golden ratio, you phase conjugate, and that produces the scalar or longitudinal components, which is the compressional wave, which we'd like to talk about later, but I don't want to confuse the matter at the moment. Just the end of my thought about Lisa's question here is that you start with two opposing light cones, and if they're perfect, they set up the rest to finish the cube, and if the cube's perfect, then it embeds, makes golden ratio in the dodeca, and then you phase conjugate, and that's when you produce the magic. You produce the implosion, the negentropy at the center, and that is how the high dielectric materials in the phase conjugate mirror produce the self-organization, and that's the magic, the implosive collapse. Now, we want to understand that in more practical terms, in terms of bioactive fields. But first, there's something we need to say about producing gravity. Are we going to be able to talk about gravity here and not confuse people? Let's see how good we are. First, let's see if there's any more questions. Oh yeah, Lisa says, thinking of the animation of the Star Mother where several potential vortices. Exactly, yes. In fact, you see, you start with a tetracube, which has 6 faces, therefore 6 vortex meeting, and that becomes an animation of basically electron shell structure. The pi suborbital is actually 6. And then when that's perfect, superposed around the cube is the dodecaecosa, which has 12 faces, 6 pair, and hence you have a 6 pair of vortex and the 12 faces of dodecaecosa. So first the tetracube is stable, and then embedding around that is dodecaecosa. And we should actually play the little visual of how we apply that to a better understanding of the chemistry of the atomic table. So this is just a way to say, hey, what we've just talked about is useful in your first year chemistry class because, I'm now referring to the article goldenmean.info/creation. And here we take the well-known work in theosophy, and the original book was called Occult Chemistry by Leadbeater and Besant. Let's see, which picture are we going to play with first? I'm waiting for the picture to stabilize on your screen. So basically what we're saying is now we're beginning to understand how vortex make the platonic solids. Now let's prove that that's the way electron shells are born, and ultimately the nucleus. So that's the point we're making here is now that we understand better the wave mechanics that make platonic solids, let's apply that to our first year chemistry class. How are electron shells born? And then how is the nucleus assembled? And we're going to say here that specifically they are fractal, namely that the electron shells are an interdigitation of platonic solids, and so is the nucleus, hence self-similar and fractal. And that's the point made by the article in front of you, goldenmean.info/creation. And here is the picture to start with. Here it's showing that remember, in your chemistry class, hopefully you remember a little bit of your chemistry class. It's very good because, you know, key to psychokinesis is to be able to visualize waves. So let's do basic visualizations of chemistry so eventually we can be better magicians. No excuses for not learning a little chemistry. So here is the picture, which should be really, I think, the way your chemistry teacher, who hopefully wanted you to be a good psychokinetic magician, taught you your electron shells. So what your chemistry teacher said is, you have the main orbitals of the nesting that makes the whole atomic tables, and all the electron shells are nested in a series of subshells, which interdigitate to form the main shells. And the subshells are simple. There's only a few. They're called S, P, D, and F, right here, this picture. So you take the S, P, D, F suborbitals and you nest them one inside the other, and you have all the main orbitals and the whole atomic table. So effectively, you could say, in terms of electrons, that there is only one set of geometries, S, P, D, F, which are the S suborbital. Here's the shape. It's literally a donut with 2 vortex opposite ends. This is the way the clairvoyants saw it here on left, and this is the way modern physics sees it on the right, the geometry of the S suborbital. Now, obviously, there's some permutations, but basically, the S suborbital is a donut with a couple teardrops going into the donut. Okay, that's pretty simple. The pi suborbital, the next one, the P, is 6 electrons, 6 vortex. Remember, the s vortex was 2 electrons because it's 2 vortex, one on the top and bottom of a donut. Pretty simple. The pi suborbital is a cube. It's tetracubic, and physics is clear and agrees. And here's the picture of how the clairvoyants saw it very accurately, Leadbeater and Besant, in occult chemistry, later proven in Phillips' work, Psi Perception of Quarks. Very good work Phillips did proving the clairvoyants were right in their atomic chemistry long before electron microscopes produced this picture right here of the cubic geometry of the pi suborbital. Again, cubic, 3 pairs of vortex, 6 electrons. So I had 2 vortex, 2 electrons s, 6 electrons, 6 vortex of cube. And then the d and f suborbital, what are called the star dumbbell groups in occult chemistry. And clearly, they are icosahedrodeca. Specifically, the d suborbital has 10 electrons, 10 vortex, 5 vortex pair related to dodeca. And the symmetry pair opposite, the f suborbital, has 14 electrons, 14 vortex, 7 vortex pair. And 7 vortex pair is the 7-axis symmetry of the tetra. And Armand Weiler did a whole bunch of work on that, showing that the tetra 7-axis symmetry with the 2 pseudo-rotations is how the f suborbital works. And we have a whole website about that, 7arrows.net. Anyway, you see the 5-7 pair there, making the 10-14 electrons of d and f suborbital being icosahedrodeca related. So basically, you could make a good case to say that if you know how platonic solids nest, you've got yourself a model of electrons. Here is the picture from 21st Century Magazine when Lawrence Hecht did his wonderful analysis of Moon's work in chemistry showing both the nuclear and electron geometries. Is this nest right here in this picture of an infinite nest of platonic solids embedded one inside the other, just like the Star Mother kit. And it's called the geometric basis for the periodicity of the elements. And here is the table. I'm going to just zoom in just a little bit in the view here. Zoom in. Make this a little bit bigger. Okay, this is the article in 21st Century Magazine showing the platonic geometry of the nucleus from the same famous work by the chemist Moon at the University of Chicago, who was quite a hero in my view. And basically what he did was simple. He took this entire list of all the elements in the atomic table and took the geometry of the nucleus, the nuclear hadrons, protons and neutrons, and showed that the way they nest in the nucleus was tetra, cube, octa, icosa, right here. And he drew this picture. There's a beautiful work by, you should look up the work by Moon, et cetera, et cetera. We're not going to dwell on this, but basically here is proof that the way the nuclear hadrons, protons and neutrons, nest is the platonic solids. Oh, by the way, that's the way the electrons nest. Oh, by the way, that means that the inside looks like the outside. Hello, that's called fractality. In other words, fractal embedding is what keeps the nucleus inside the electrons. And we're going to return to that thought when we get to Mark Rohrbar's equation, which showed a new perfect geometry for the ratio of electron mass to neutron mass, which proves, in his view, which I think is fabulous, that perfect embedding, which is to say perfect nesting or fractality, is what holds the proton inside the electron, which is where we're going with tonight's conversation. Okay. Let me check to see if we have any more fun questions over here in the chat window. Oh, Lisa says, thank you. I think I understand. Cool, Lisa. That's nice to have a little encouragement there. Thank you, thank you. Okay, so next thing in the outline for tonight's course says question number 3. How does that reinvent understanding the cause of gravity, the cause of negentropy, and centripetal forces? Oh, that seems like a hard question. You think we can handle that? We're going to have to get ambitious here. Okay. So, cause of gravity. We don't want to be pretentious here, do we? And understand gravity. I mean, if NASA knew why objects fall to the ground, they could probably make propulsion. But Einstein didn't figure it out, and so neither did NASA. You think we can figure that out? Are we being presumptuous? Yes, we're being presumptuous. But here we go. Okay, cause of gravity. Laws of gravity. We're going to need some pictures for that one. Now, don't pretend this is going to be hard. Let's pretend this is going to be easy. Okay, cause of gravity. Another picture. There's a favorite picture I want for this picture. It's my hydrogen radii picture. Here we go. Okay. We wait for that picture to show up on your screen, and then we explain the cause of gravity. Okay, so yes, here this picture is showing up on your screen now. So I intuited and then proved that, because after I read this famous work on the fact that the interstitial radii of hydrogen, that the distance between one radii and the other was based on golden ratio, I thought to myself, ooh, if we could prove that the center of hydrogen was also golden ratio, then we'd have proof of what's holding hydrogen together. Oh, and by the way, probably what causes the gravity that holds hydrogen together. So that was my intuition. There's lots of work, and you'll find all this at goldenmean.info/goldenproof. Hayrovska's famous work where he finds golden ratio all over the structure of hydrogen. Again, that's goldenmean.info/goldenproof. So I intuited from Hayrovska's work, which I credit here, that if he finds golden ratio between the shells of hydrogen and the way hydrogen nests, then there must be something golden mean ratio to the center of hydrogen. I also intuited that the center of hydrogen has to be related to Planck. Obviously, Planck length and time is kind of the universal black hole, and this introduces Nassim's work as well. So I began putzing around with radii of hydrogen, which Hayrovska had shown were related by golden ratio. I said, oh, the distance to center must also be golden ratio. And what would it be golden ratio to? The little black hole at the center of hydrogen called Planck length and time. So I got lucky and wrote a new equation. And I thank Mark for helping me write a Google program to do those calculations. But basically, the equation is right here in the center of this picture, that there's three radii of hydrogen, all known to be related by golden ratio. And then I newly proved that if you take Planck length times golden mean to the 1/16th and 1/17th and 1/18th power, exact integer exponents of golden ratio times Planck, called phase conjugation, you accurately newly model the pure geometry of hydrogen. So no one can argue with that. That's too clean and cool. You know, the chances that that's a coincidence is 0. So there must be some meaning to that. So any physicist you go to who says phase conjugation golden ratio is not the cause of gravity, you ask that physicist, why does golden ratio times why do exact multiples of golden ratio times Planck produce the radii of hydrogen? If they don't agree that that's the cause of gravity, then why is that incredible coincidence there? That's on the cover of my book. Okay, so now no one can argue that golden mean ratio to center is hydrogen, because that equation cannot be argued. There's no way to say that equation isn't real, because it's so impossible that that is a coincidence. So given that information, what does that tell us about the nature of gravity? Well, I say that the reason gravity is caused by golden mean ratio is the following. Now, maybe let's do a little bit more background here. So later then, and I'm very, very glad that Mark is with us tonight, Mark Rohrbach is going to be teaching a more advanced course on this at Fractal U, and also there is a second course in this series. This is Mark's website here, phxmarker.blogspot.fr, and you can find all that at the article that Mark helped me put together, fractalfield.com/fractalspacetime and fractalfield.com/conjugate gravity. And what Mark did was, Mark took Nassim's work, and Mark, maybe you could correct me here if I don't get this right. Tell me I'm doing this right. Mark took, and I'm going to do a simplification now, and Mark will do more later, but Mark took Nassim's equation for the proton, in which, remember, here's the background. Nassim said, We got the pictures down here. Cause of gravity, fractal. One moment. Conjugate perception, conjugate gravity. Let me get the right pictures in front of us. Yeah, here it is. Nassim had written a new equation for the radii of the nucleus of the proton, called the Schwarzschild proton, in which he said that then fit in a cascade here in what he called the scaling law for all organized matter. And Elizabeth Rauscher claims that she helped greatly with this mathematics at that time, and we'd like to credit both Nassim and Elizabeth Rauscher here. But they did some beautiful work here, and what they showed was that if you took a plotted graph here, and maybe I'm going to do a little zoom in here. Wait, zoom in just a little bit. I would like to try to explain this graph just briefly, just so that it becomes more clear. So the dots on this graph here, this is a diagonal line here as a ratio of frequency to radius in centimeters. And the dots on this graph, this is the frequency versus radius of the universe, the frequency versus radius of the galactic big scale and the galactic local scale. This is the frequency versus the radius, the S here, of this solar system, the frequency versus radius of the atom, and the frequency versus radius of the Big Bang. Okay, now if you take that line and take those dots on that line, what you find between them, and remember the proton, the atom is on that line here, you get here these numbers. 1.612, golden ratio, 0.639, 1.62. You get golden ratio, golden ratio, golden ratio, and golden ratio. Hello, which is called the scaling law for all organized matter, called phi, or golden ratio relations. This is Nassim's work. It was very good. So Nassim has attempted to prove a new radius of the Schwarzschild proton, and in the process shown that the way that embeds in all creation mechanics, called a scaling law, is golden mean. So golden mean is what holds all that stuff together. So Nassim is supporting this argument that golden mean ratio is involved in the creation of gravity, and now I'm about to try to state more precisely how golden ratio causes gravity. But in the process, we're mentioning again Mark Rohrbach's work, where he then took Nassim's Schwarzschild proton radius here in this equation from Mark Rohrbach's work, which he's going to explain more in a follow-up course here. If you take Nassim's number for, and this here is R sub p, the proton radius called muonic hydrogen proton radius, R sub p, in this equation, and you can produce, with using only that and the fine structure constant here, you produce this new pure geometric ratio, Rydberg's constant and Mark's work, for the ratio of the proton to the electron mass. First time the proton to the electron mass has been defined in a simple, pure, elegant geometric nest, which is pretty strong evidence that Nassim's work is right, and in the process, pretty strong evidence that Nassim's work on golden ratio is right, and in the process, pretty strong evidence that my work is right, which Mark was kind enough to acknowledge here. Also proof of Dan Winter's phase conjugate work on embedding gravity, basically. So that Mark is going to explain more later, but if Nassim is right about the Schwarzschild proton, and Mark is right with a new elegant ratio of the proton to electron mass, then that all locks in also Nassim's work on golden ratio, suggesting again golden ratio and perfect embedding, which then supports this work on phase conjugation as a cause of gravity. So all of that is lining up to say that we're right. Golden ratio has to do with how gravity is caused. But now the problem is that you need to imagine for yourself right at this moment how it is that golden mean ratio is making gravity. And that's what we want to talk about. That's the next subject of our little conversation tonight. Let I'm just going to check this chat window and see if I'm not missing any fun questions. Oh, yes. So Mark is putting the links in the chat window. And Mark says, yes, thank you. Thank you, Mark. I hope I did a respectable job of just introducing your work. I haven't really described Mark's work. I've just introduced it. But Mark is cheering me on. Good. I feel better now. Thank you, Mark. Thank you. Thank you. So another drink of water. And we need to tell Einstein, who didn't figure it out, the cause of gravity. That's the next thing we need to do. Okay, let's do it. I am going to select a slide here in this window for the purposes of this conversation. Hopefully one of my favorite slides, if I can find it here. This is about adding and multiplying. Oh yeah, here's my little slide. Okay, we're going to use this one. Click. Okay, this is a picture we would like to discuss. It takes about 4 seconds to show up in your window because this software is a little slow, but that's okay. We can handle that. Here it comes. Okay, there it is. So here is the picture I would like to talk about. Remember, this is a picture of 10 golden mean spirals on one of those cones, 12 cones in Pentodeca and 6 cones in a cube. Each of those cones, we say, looks like this. This is the top view here. Here is the side view. And here is the oblique view. Notice the golden ratio nested nodes on the pine cone here. So this is one of those pine cones. We're only talking about pine cones now. We have nothing else to talk about but pine cones. And this is the golden mean array on that perfect pine cone. And here's where that pine cone needs to learn to kiss noses. And so this is the top-down view here. And I say this is precisely how the wave mechanics holds hydrogen together. And I believe I have proved it by writing that new equation for hydrogen radii. So what do we get here in this picture of these 5, 10 spirals on this cone? The top-down view of hydrogen, DNA, and probably the universe. Remember, we were going to show you that picture that New Scientist magazine says the universe is fractal, and then Scientific American magazine says the universe is dodecahedral. Could they both be right? The universe is a fractal dodecahedron. Well, the dodecahedron is this golden mean ratio, so everybody seems to be agreeing on the geometry. So why? Why is the top-down view of galaxies and universes and DNA and every living protein pent-dodeca? Here's that view. So looking down this golden mean spiral on this cone, we observe something, that each time the golden mean spirals cross and make this beautiful picture of nested pentagrams, that where the waves cross at each node in this nest, the golden mean ratio allows the waves to add and multiply recursively, constructively. That's old news. That's how we started tonight's class, was to say golden mean ratio is the solution to constructive adding and multiplying of waves, and therefore all of mass, all of the universe, and all of charge. So where these waves cross in this array, which we've proven is the view of hydrogen in the star mother kit, not only do the wavelengths add and multiply, this is key to my hypothesis of why gravity and color and life force and centripetal force and negentropy exist. So this is actually the heart of our course tonight, that we together visualize this properly. That as the waves converge in this geometry, not only do they add and multiply constructively their wavelength, but I hypothesize strongly, that they add and multiply their wave velocity, something called phase velocity. That if they were meeting in a cube, they couldn't add and multiply constructively, so the velocity, the wave front phase velocity, would not add and multiply constructively either. Only this pent golden ratio nest allows the wave front phase velocities to add and multiply constructively also. What do I mean by phase velocity? It's like, we use the old picture, imagine a surfer is riding this wave and suddenly he gets down in the in the curl of that wave. He's inside the belly of the curl of the wave. And at a certain moment, the wave collapses on top of him. And if he's lucky and not killed, he's shot like a gun out from the curl at the center of that wave because the phase velocities have added and multiplied constructively. And that actually is going to relate to our conversation in a few minutes, if we get there, about how phase conjugation produces longitudinal, sometimes called scalar or compressional waves from transverse. So that's a conversation we want to get to here later, that phase conjugation, this is a picture of phase conjugation here in front of us, allows the production of longitudinal waves, because this is the key to healing, this is the key to compression, this is the key to flame in the mind, this is the key to plasma containment, the holy grail of plasma fusion, this is the key to flame in the mind and cyclic, all kinds of fun stuff. Longitudinal compressional waves produced by phase conjugation. So in order to understand that in a few minutes, we need to understand this picture in front of us right now. When the phase velocities add and multiply constructively, something happens named gravity, in my view, specifically, that only this geometry of charge compression turns compression into acceleration towards center, named the gravity. This is my statement of my view of what is my new unified field theory, which is that phase conjugation by Golden ratio is the cause of the gravity. This is an audacious hypothesis by me, an electrical engineer who's barely a physicist. But I'm making this audacious hypothesis now. And I'm going to make some predictions based on this hypothesis. One of which is that when we measure speeds going faster than light, they're going to be Golden mean ratio multiples times c, the speed of light. And Professor Raymond Chow has already measured that 4.23 Golden mean cubed times the speed of light. So there's some evidence that I am right. So why? Why? Well, remember, the phase velocities are adding and multiplying. They're producing acceleration of charge from the compression of charge. So if you compress charge only in this Golden ratio geometry, you produce acceleration of that charge towards center because the phase velocities of the charge waves are adding and multiplying constructively, speeding up the charge going towards center. Remember, this hypothesis is very clear that gravity cannot be discriminated from acceleration of charge. It is the same thing. It's like Einstein saying, if you're standing in an elevator and it starts going up and you feel you got heavier, that form of gravity cannot be discriminated from any other kind of gravity. There's only one kind of gravity. It is the acceleration of charge. So, if you can make charge acceleration from charge compression, Golden mean ratio, you can make the only form of gravity that's measurable. This is an audacious, interesting hypothesis. But if I am right, we can make all kinds of fun predictions here, like if you rearrange masses to be a dodecahedron, you'll make more gravity. Hello, did you notice on that cover of New Scientist magazine, oh wait, we have to go back there because it's so much fun. Got to find that picture. We had the pictures right handy. So here is Nature magazine saying, oh, we have observed the masses of the universe are arranged in a dodecahedron. The cover of the magazine, Nature magazine, the universe is a dodecahedron. Fine. Now here is the cover of New Scientist magazine saying, oh, the universe, masses are arranged in a fractal. Okay, you know, could they both be right? Maybe a dodecahedron is the perfect form of a fractal. Well, the point I want to make here, without getting too enthused and carrying on and boring you, is that physics is clear. There's more gravity in this universe here than there ought to be. So they have invented what I consider this absurd idea of, quote, dark matter to account only for one painful little inconsistency, which is there's more gravity around than there is mass that ought to be making it. And so they say dark matter is making extra gravity. I say they're wrong. I say that the mass of the universe, which is now known and proven to be arranged in a dodecahedron, that's old news. The mass of the universe makes more gravity because when you put masses in a dodecahedron, you get extra gravity. And by the way, there's some pretty simple experiments involving microgravity measure that could prove me right. Isn't this fun? So, we could have some fun with this. There are some predictions I'm making, which is to say, speeds of light faster than the speed of light will be measured at multiples of golden ratio times the speed of light, because when this charge goes through center, which is through Planck length, it will then be accelerated or phase conjugated to speeds faster than light, which are golden ratio multiples times the speed of light. This is a key component of my phase conjugate theory of gravity, as well as the fact that if you arrange masses like the universe's masses are arranged in a dodecahedron, you'll make extra gravity. And you will no longer need to invent this dumb idea called dark matter. Okay, so you can test this interesting hypothesis by doing some actual experiments, which might end up to be cheap. So that could be cool. So let's test now to see if you have understood the key component of this theory of gravity. First, I'm going to test to see if one of my favorite Gradle animations will actually play on your screen. There's the 2 pine cones. And there's the caduceus down the pine cone. So my little animation is playing at about 10 frames a second, and you're seeing about 2 frames a second. But actually, you get a little flavor. That if you take those golden spiral down that cones, you get a cup within a cup. You get the Holy Grail. And this is the Holy Grail of physics. It's actually implosive compression. You see how this is going to begin to fit together. But the one thing I wanted to verify was clear here. Oh yes, here's this lovely branching algorithm. But if I start playing animations here, we'll spend the whole night. I want to be sure that we get the core concept down. So back to this same picture. So at the center here, in this picture we have been talking about, we've probably been talking about this picture too long, but at the center here, you have the Planck dimension. And I say that when the charge waves get down to the Planck dimension, something happens. Remember, they're accelerating down this pine cone, and the phase velocities are adding and multiplying constructively, turning compression of charge into acceleration of charge towards center. That at the center, what happens is something which in hydrodynamics, when they teach golden spiral in wave mechanics, called hydrodynamics, they say what the golden mean spiral is, they call it optimized translation of vorticity, which is to say how you could turn linear inertia into rotational inertia without losing it, without destructive interference, which is a great way for a wave mechanic of golden ratio to be taught. So I think when hydrodynamics physics says golden ratio is optimized translation of vorticity, they're telling us interesting, beautiful, cool stuff, like the meaning of the L or the phase shift or Elohim. We could get esoteric here. But what's happening down that cone is that because the golden spiral is the perfect spiral, the rotational inertia, which is called mass. So if you rotate, first of all, we're saying, let's go back to basics here. We're trying to do a unified field theory, and we're trying to say how the universe works in simple enough terms that you can imagine it clearly enough to do the psychokinesis inside your own head. We need that unified field, because otherwise we're disempowered. So we're saying it is a unified field. It is made of a compressible media, as in Dewey-Larson, everything is motion. And that compressible media is charge. Elizabeth Rauscher asked me to say, what is charge? Well, I'm going to say, what is charge right now? Charge is the compression and rarefaction of the ether. That's what it is. Plus and minus charge is compression and rarefaction of the ether. So the term ether and charge are actually synonyms in this regard, in my hypothesis as an electrical engineer here. And so if you rotate charge, you store something called inertia. And that in my view, well, actually, that is everyone's view, is the only definition we have for mass. No one disagrees. Wrote you that mass is only defined by inertia. That's old news. I say that inertia is created by rotating charge. So charge rotation is the cause and definition of mass. I don't think anyone could really argue with that. But further than I say that if you rotate charge, you produce a period which is called time. So mass and time, in my view, are only defined by the rotation of charge. So if it doesn't spin, it doesn't matter. Okay, so now that we have that out of the way, when you rotate charge down a golden spiral, you're translating charge rotation, in optimized translation of vorticity, down that spiral, turning the rotation of charge into a linear movement of charge at the center, specifically right here. Let's see. Let's put an arrow here. I'm putting this arrow right here at the tip of this pine cone. This is where that pine cone is about to kiss noses, and the length. You notice that the tip of this pyramid has been cut off. That's the Planck length. So when this spinning charge, translating its vorticity, gets down to the Planck dimension here, suddenly what had been charge rotation has been optimized, translated in vorticity, how hydrodynamics defines golden mean spiral, and that rotation of charge has been converted into the linear motion of charge out the center through the Planck length, phase conjugating, producing a longitudinal wave, which everyone knows longitudinal EMF is faster than the speed of light. That's old news. So this is the way phase conjugation produces longitudinal waves. Now, and faster than light waves. And I say that is the black hole which allows charge out through center. And when the charge passes out through center, through the speed of light, that is how gravity is created. So you have these wormholes going out centers of gravity like the one Jodie Foster traveled in the dodecahedron in the movie Contact. Oh, maybe we just got too metaphoric here and not enough physics. Let me check to see if we have questions. So now, next thing I want to do is present a picture of the difference between transverse and longitudinal waves. That's my next jump here. Oh yeah, so Mark is just putting a link in here to show where these images are. That's great, Mark, thank you. Okay, so we produced an article on this called The Conjugate Mind. Now let me see if I can find that article, because here we're trying to create a clear visualization of the difference between longitudinal and transverse waves. That's our challenge at this moment. Here we are. Fractal Field Conjugate Mind. Now, in order to make this conversation more refreshing, let's get a little psychology and psychokinesis story in here so that we don't bore people who don't want such intense physics, okay? So here we are doing a little implications for psychokinesis from the conversation we just had. Look at that. My desktop sharing is working. This is cool. Okay. So I'm scrolling up a little bit, and here is our little, this is actually a canned animation, which has been shared many times with others as well. It wasn't really original. But this is an animation here, and you can see it playing slowly on your screen because the screen refreshes slow. But this is called a transverse wave. And you see the transverse wave. Now what I like here is that you're seeing my face as well as my screen, so I can show you something fun here. Okay, I got my slinky handy. I'm going to do this. So transverse waves go up and down like this. You see that little animation? So a transverse wave goes up and down like this along this slinky. This is transverse. See, it's bumping up and down. Transverse waves is most of electromagnetics, but very rarely acoustic. Whereas if we go down here, you have longitudinal waves. Now we're playing this a little different. A longitudinal wave is a wave of compression that goes along this slinky, a compressional wave. So it's like compression like this. Okay, so you see this longitudinal wave animation here. And almost all sound waves are primarily longitudinal, and almost all electromagnetic waves are primarily transverse, up and down. But how do you turn an electromagnetic wave into a longitudinal wave, sometimes incorrectly called scalar waves or torsional? That's the magic. Phase conjugation turns electromagnetics from the up and down transverse into this longitudinal compressional wave. Well, if you understand how to make longitudinal EMF compressional waves, you have all kinds of secrets. You have how the military hide the radar under the paint. You have how the Nazis made the Foo Fighters. You have how the Nazi bell flew. You have the secret of the Vimana. And you have the secret of psychokinesis. All kinds of cool stuff. But unfortunately, now we have to really explain that in detail if you're going to understand this well with me. Yes, so now we need to explain. Why is it so important to understand longitudes? Just to give you an idea of why this is so critical, I'll just give you a little example here. So we built this frequency signature, which I just told you about, Planck length, which is the cover of my book. Here. You have my, here's the cover of my book now, and here is that only equation, which is on the cover of my book. It's that same caduceus, Planck length and time times Goldwyn ratio produces all these critical frequencies, photosynthesis, Venus year, Earth year, all this cool stuff. Predicts the geometry of all biologic negentropy. We took that equation and we built this cool gadget based on Priory, who had healed hundreds or thousands of cancers documented by the French government. And then I discovered that the frequencies he used fit the equation on the cover of my book. And I thought, oh, then we're going to have to build that gizmo also. And guess what? We did. And guess what? It works. It's cool. Therify.net. I'm just giving you this as an example of why it's going to be so important that we understand how phase conjugation makes longitudinal superluminal compressional wave faster than light. So we call this other wonderful professor, medical doctor in France, who was famous for working with the famous Dr. Priory, who had healed hundreds of thousands of cancers with his plasma tube frequency signature, we now know is my equation. And he said, yes, Tom Bearden was his old friend. You know, Tom Bearden is the scalar longitudinal whiz, and I work with him quite a lot. In fact, we have that in common with Professor Dr. Morzeau here in France. And Morzeau said to me, he said, well, yes, you know, longitudinal waves are the key to all this healing stuff. So I'm just saying to you that if we know how we make these longitudinals, we're going to have the key of a lot of cool things: healing, psychokinesis, flame in the mind. So now we're going to go to another article to try to understand the psychology, the psychokinesis, physics of perception, physics of bliss, based on the same wave mechanics. We're going to start with brain waves. And we're going to an article called fractalfield.com/conjugate perception. So we were in this article, fractalfield.com/conjugate gravity, saying phase conjugation is the cause of the centripetal force called gravity, and in my view, electronegativity in general. And now we're at a related web article from this work saying that phase conjugation is the cause of perception and bliss. I mean, let's not be humble. We might as well explain the cause of everything that's a mystery while we're at it, right? I guess us Scorpios are not specialized in humility. No, I think that's not the issue. The issue actually is that if we're going to be psychokinetic and understand the nature of our universe so that our mind can embed in the universe and steer these waves around, we need to know what mind is, and so we're going to have to be able to visualize these things for ourselves. That's why I say that self-empowerment requires knowing what we're discussing right now. So at least I'm enthusiastic. So here's the article, fractalfield.com/conjugate perception. And the article starts with this picture. So here, let's see, maybe I'm going to zoom in just a little bit here. Zoom in. Okay, make it a little bit bigger. There you go. You're not going to be able to read the numbers, but that doesn't matter at this moment. So here is the cover of my book, and here's my equation in blue, Planck time times exponents of golden ratio, and you get this caduceus cascade here. I'll read the numbers. They're too small for you, but they're 2.78 hertz, 4.5, 7.29, 11.8, and 19.09 hertz. That's this cascade, and you can find it on the cover of my book, which is free with this course. So Planck time times exponents golden ratio produces that cascade called a caduceus phase conjugation, and that also, that same cascade of frequencies predicts exactly where's the picture? The two frequencies of photosynthesis right here. Yes. I'm even finding my pictures tonight. It's taking a second for it to show up on your screen, which is understandable. Ah, yes, it's 4 seconds later. It shows up on your screen. It's a little bit clunky, but that's okay. Here we go. So here is the exact frequencies of photosynthesis. In other words, purple and orange make photosynthesis work. And here in the middle, green prevents photosynthesis from working. That's why every plant you see looks green, because the green photon is the only one it cannot eat, because it's the only one that's not phase conjugate. Therefore, it prevents charge distribution. Therefore, every plant on the planet using photosynthesis must spit out and not use the green photon, because it's a charge distribution preventer. It's cubic, it's non-phase conjugate, and therefore photosynthesis don't like it. Whereas these two exact peaks right here from the physics of photosynthesis, the only colors that actually make plants grow, purple, 427 nanometers, and orange, 691 nanometers, turn out to be exactly, right, precisely at the peaks of what makes photosynthesis happen, an exact golden ratio power of Planck length. Isn't that cool? It means that photosynthesis is a negentropic phase conjugate pump wave, perfected, implosive, self-organizing collapse. That's why photosynthesis exists, I say. And by the way, that same harmonic series predicts the almost exact duration of the Earth year and Venus year, the key frequencies of hydrogen, and a whole bunch of other stuff. So that's fractality in time. And I say that charge coupling enabled by phase conjugation is the definition of coincidence, the physics of fractality in time. So I say that when Greg Braden wrote his book, Greg Braden's a sweet guy, but when he wrote his book on fractality in time, he did not get it. And I also say that's true of, well, I shouldn't be critical, but I just say that anybody who's talking about fractality in time that doesn't mention Planck time times golden ratio does not know what fractality in time is. Sorry, Greg Braden. I like you a lot, but you didn't get it, and your book is incomplete. Okay, my humble opinion. So also now there's a more advanced conversation here saying that that phase conjugation is the cause of the existence of color. And I will only just briefly review that note, only because we're at that picture here, which is that if you take the optical distance of the visible spectra between red, ultraviolet, and what's called ultra-red, which is a simple octave, 700 to 350 nanometers. And it had already been known that if you then mark the primary colors on that octave of the visible spectra, and you realize that color is merely a photon shaped like a torus, and that if you measure the angle of the tilt of that torus, that is called color. So that when the torus tilts at 90 degrees to you, you have green. And that is opposite to conjugate, a 90-degree angle, and therefore prevents photosynthesis. So here is the visible spectrum divided in an octave, 350 to 700 nanometers. Here are the primary colors marked on that octave if that octave is proportional to tilt or phase angle of the photon as a torus. Remember, in physics, everything is made of donuts. There is nothing else. That's conventional physics. And Nassim was not the first to say that. So if the photon is a torus, Paul, the Wi-Fi's on, the Ethernet's off. If the photon is a torus, then if you model the angle of that photon, which is called color, from 0 to 180 degrees, being the precise octave from red to infrared, 700 to 350 nanometers, then green is perfectly 90-degree turn and opposite to conjugate, hence the term negative green in psychotronics. They know they could kill you with it, as in Ibrahim Karim, but he didn't know why. The physics is because green is a phase angle of photon, which is opposite to conjugate, and therefore can be very damaging. And orange is 45 degrees, and violet is 135 degrees, simple cubic angles, no problem. So we got all the primary colors except 2, which are on that line, yellow and blue. And the precise angle predicted by the 580 nanometers of yellow is 63 degrees, and blue is 117 degrees. And I had the insight from looking at this chart to realize for the first time that those angles, 63 and 117 degrees, in this dodecahedron here, let me putz with camera, okay. So the flat bottom of this dodecahedron here, this angle at the bottom of that dodecahedron, let's see, camera, angle, okay. My hand on the flat bottom of this dodecahedron. So this angle to this face of the dodecahedron from the flat bottom, the outside of that angle is 117 degrees. The inside of that angle is 63 degrees. So 63 and 117 degrees being the angle that make yellow and blue is proof that the vortex angle of the photon donut that makes yellow and blue is actually because the donut photons have to make a dodecahedron. In other words, phase conjugate. Hence this picture. So what we're saying is the reason that color exists, and this is the 3 pairs of primary colors modeled. The physics I believe, is that as the photons approach the center, the white light entering the prism, the reason it emerges sorted into the rainbow, hence the reason color exists, is because the light is forced to phase conjugate at the center of a dodecahedron, and only the waves that fit that phase discipline emerge, called the Platonic and dodeca angles of the photon donut, which is how color is defined. Examples of this, when Tibetan saints die, this is well proved that rainbows occur. Well, we know the physics. They have phase conjugated their environment and added centripetal force. There might be some other fun physics we could do here. So I say that phase conjugation is the cause of color. Well, we didn't come here to this conversation to prove that tonight. That is some advanced thing. We're talking about conjugate perception, and we want to finish that conversation. Because if we could understand how phase conjugation causes perception, we can understand how you make a flame in your mind, do psychokinesis, and all kinds of fun stuff. And that's kind of where we wanted to finish, or at least climax this part of tonight's course. But before I do that, I'm just going to wander over here. Oh, yes, so Mark put a calculator in for calculating violet wavelength and confirming some of that stuff. That's great, Mark. Thank you. Okay. Remember, you're welcome to intervene with some questions here, both in the chat and with your microphone. We can have, if your questions were focused during the conversation, great. And then the last half hour, it's just open dialogue here. This is going to be an open conversation. We can have fun with this, and we can go anywhere you want with this conversation. But I see we have about a half hour left, and it would be cool if we could really now focus on this idea of understanding phase conjugation as the mechanism of brainwaves, the mechanism of perception, the mechanism of bliss, the mechanism of psychokinesis. That's if we get that chunk of understanding in here, we'll have done a fairly good job for tonight's intro course. So let's see if we can really do that part of the conversation. So here we are back again at this article called fractalfield.com/conjugate perception. And we got a little sidetracked on this physics of that phase conjugation as a cause of color, which I get all excited about. But here we are back on the key slide, which is showing up slowly on your screen. So, nature of perception. We were privileged to be friends with and working with Professor Konstantin Korotkov when he was in Russia. He was charged at the World Without Blindness gatherings to measure those young people mostly who were able to see without their eyes. And what Dr. Korotkov then did measure, I guess we're going to scroll down in this screen here to some of his measurements. Yeah, here he is, yes. Okay, here's a picture. So he found that people who learned to see without their eyes, the Bronnikov method, and others are now teaching that work, that one of the primary correlates to success, that is, if someone was seeing light inside their head and seeing without their eyes, it was then most likely that they were making golden ratio in their brain waves. And here's a slide slowly coming up on your screen of that image. That he called this the bioelectrographic correlates of altered states of consciousness, or peak perception. In other words, if you teach yourself to make golden ratio between the frequency of alpha and beta in your brain waves, and finally the slide is on your screen, that this is an indicator that you're going to be able to learn to see without your eyes. And if all these films in Russia of people who are blindfolded and they're seeing perfectly, and children, and there's children around the world who've learned the skill. It's very cool. If you learn to pump your spine liquid pump, you light a screen inside your head like it's the third wave of the four-wave mixing. The two hemispheres are conjugating, and you light a screen inside your head consciously, and then you can see without your eyes. And we want to explain that. We want to understand that. So first, I'm pointing out that Korotkov proved that peak perception and seeing without your eyes was correlated to golden ratio, alpha to beta, golden ratio in the brainwaves. Then further, if we look at the mind mirror literature here in this picture on the right, the mind mirror is a famous EEG brainwave biofeedback that displayed the right versus left hemisphere brainwave harmonics, alpha to beta here, as a symmetry between the peaks. And their definition in the brainwave map for what they call the creative or spiritual state is depicted right here. You can see my little arrow. The right left hemisphere. Here's the alpha peak and here's the beta peak. And if you actually make the measurements on their screen, which they never did, you find out that the ratio of the alpha peak to beta peak in hertz, the actual frequency ratio, was golden mean ratio. So the mind mirror people unknowingly proved that golden mean ratio was related to the creative and spiritual state the same way that Korotkov did. So I knew that and took that to my invention, the bliss tuner, here. And this is the picture of the first time we measured alpha to beta ratios in golden mean ratio. So I developed a technology called the bliss tuner, which is a brainwave spectrum analysis here. And this is an animation, which is a bit too fast for your screen. Let's see how fast it plays on your screen. Oh, you're actually seeing a little bit of that. So this is a lady in Australia who's having a bliss experience. She's leaning back, having this great bliss experience. And here is 1, 2, 3, 4 harmonics in her brainwaves. This is the delta, this is the alpha in green, and this is the beta in purple. And this whole harmonic cascade is golden mean ratio in her brainwaves, strongly correlated to the moment of bliss. And so that's what this picture up top is that we started with here, the key picture of this whole website. I notice when I scroll up a screen with lots of pictures, it confuses the display here. So we'll just give it a second. But on the left, you have that same brainwave picture from my bliss tuner showing 1, 2, 3, 4 harmonics. Yeah, now you see my little white arrow going up there. So this is the alpha in green here. Takes a little while. Yeah, there's the alpha in green, and here's the beta in purple. And look at the frequencies. Originally, when alpha beta in brainwaves was defined, they actually, the centers of those parts of the spectrum were golden ratio in the original definition of alpha and beta. But look down here, these are the frequencies of the Schumann harmonics. There are 3 Hertz, 7.8, 3, 14.3, and 20.8, which are so close to this perfect phase conjugate pump wave, Planck time times golden ratio in blue here. And now here is the brain wave making that exact same phase conjugate implosive pump wave called bliss and peak perception. Now there's some other cool things we found out about this after 10 years of working with my invention, the bliss tuner on brainwaves, which was, you know, when you teach an alcoholic, the day you get a biofeedback gizmo to show him how to make more alpha, the next drink of beer is going to make him feel sick. He won't want it. Why? Because we found out that people who cannot make these alpha brainwaves, which look as Schumann, chances are when they close their eyes, they see dark inside their head. The inner screen does not light up. The lights are out. Whereas when they learn to make alpha, most people who can make alpha brainwaves, and by the way, unfortunately, it's a minority. I recommend this challenge to you. Most people who can make alpha brainwaves, and I asked, you know, when I did this for 20 years, ran around the world measuring people's brainwaves with my invention, I always ask them, people who can make alpha, when they close their eyes, they see light. People who cannot make alpha, when they close their eyes, they see dark. So what does the beer do for the alcoholic? It turns the lights on. That's why when the alcoholic learns to make alpha beta golden ratio, the lights come on inside, they don't want beer anymore, because the real purpose was to turn the lights on, which is to say achieve something resembling peak perception or bliss, because bliss, peak perception, is a biologic imperative. It's how you get an immune system. It's how you make your aura coherent enough to go through death and all this cool stuff. So, you know, the purpose of politics, body polis, is to have bliss. George Bush didn't know, but now we do. Anywho, I'm carrying on and getting too enthused. But I wanted to make one more point. So for years, I was measuring brainwaves, and I was telling people, oh yeah, you learn to make this golden ratio cascade, you're going to have bliss and peak perception. And that was cool. And then I learned something else. And I credit Bill Donovan, now named Elizabeth, for this insight. Bill pointed out to me that when Ingo Swann so famously, you remember Ingo Swann, the guy who reviewed the dark side of the moon and scared the hell out of NASA because the bad guys, the Dracos, lived there? That Ingo Swann. When Ingo Swann so famously was in the laboratory being examined, and he had this skill, he could light a flame at a distance with his mind. Well, or more precisely, what he could do was he could regularly, they had this thermistor, it's just a temperature sensor, and he could warm up this temperature sensor at a distance with his mind. Now, Paul here was telling me examples of this shaman who could light this flame like a torch with his mind every time. There's lots of examples. And in fact, we were with Dahani Wahoo at the Cherokee Arboretum initiations at the Sunray community. Thank you, Dahani, for all your help. We taught there and had a lot of fun with the Cherokee. But the point was, the Cherokee shaman was not a shaman until he could light a flame with his mind. And the same is true of the Tibetan Bon Po. In fact, the definition of bonfire is actually a Tibetan Bon Po master who can light a flame with his mind. So, as an electrical engineer, I would like to know what a flame in the mind is. Now, I've given this lecture a few times, so maybe I talk too fast. But anywho, when Ingo Swann lit the thermistor with his mind at a distance, he did it through a Faraday cage. And it was Bill who helped me understand this. Thank you, Bill. And so that means that no transverse electromagnetics got into that Faraday cage. So however Ingo Swann lit that flame with his mind, he did it with a longitudinal wave. So that taught me something new. Now I knew something I didn't know in all those years I was measuring brainwaves, that the brain has to make a longitudinal. And therefore, In order to make the longitudinal waves, the way the pine cones have to kiss noses is they have to be mirror imaged. Phase conjugate mirror, get the flavor? So that means that the right hemisphere and the left hemisphere of the brain has to be 180 degrees out of phase, because that's the only way you can make the longitudinal phase conjugate. And thus, see, when the longitudinal waves get together, they can compress symmetrically and therefore reach right into the nucleus. This is the key to plasma containment. This is the holy grail of plasma fusion physics. This makes the money they're wasting on atom smashers could feed Africa is wasted, because now we know exactly how to contain heat at a distance. Hello. This is how the Nazis took their knowledge of phase conjugate radar. It's called conjugate interferometry, and they made these plasma balls, the Foo Fighters, and this is how the Nazi Bell and the Vimana flew. Now, we're going to maybe talk about some of that more advanced physics in later courses, but I'm saying to you that the brain's ability to phase conjugate is based on this mirror opposing symmetry between hemispheres. And you know how I know for sure this is right? Because we took that exact same frequency series and we built a device called Therify.net, which really works. It creates this plasma containment interferometry at the center, which is longitudinal centripetal, which is so bioactive, so centripetal, so negentropic, and so healing. It returns wave systems back to their negentropic origins. And we believe strongly it will probably be a stem cell switch. It clearly is a metabolic. It is a Kundalini switch. It's what the ancients called Stargate or Dharana. It's the physics of what is a temple. It is many things, and we don't have time to talk about all of that tonight. But if we get the basics in tonight's conversation, then we can understand some of those more advanced concepts. And by the way, the course that follows this is called Advanced Physics of Phase Conjugation. And we'll talk about more of that. You know, how if you arrange these things symmetrically, you get plasma acceleration, plasma projection, which defines shamanism. It defines ability to get your aura through the speed of light at death. It defines how you enter the collective unconscious, the communion of saints. It defines how you design a burial ground and a hospital for successful death. All of those things emerge when we understand this core physics. But we need to start simply and just say that you get the psychokinesis when you get this production of the compressional wave from the transverse wave. You see, longitudinal waves, let me see if we can explain this simply. If you make microwave wavelengths that you can see, because you can see the actual length of the wave in microwave, and you rate the right kind of antenna, and this is what the atom smasher people need to know, because this would eliminate the need for CERN and and ITER, for example. If you make microwave dishes, make a longitudinal microwave, and then you cause them to converge, this longitudinal wave will pass through anything. Longitudinal electromagnetics will pass through just about anything, like the soldiers in the Montauk and the Philadelphia experiments, for example. So a steel container holding a plasma ball for fusion, no problem. You can interfere the longitudinal microwave right through the wall of the steel container and do plasma heat containment inside, the holy grail of fusion. So what happens is you got the longitudinal waves, and if you reconverge them at a conjugate angle, Tom Bearden says those are 180 and 30 and 60 degrees, I think. He says not 90, by the way. And so you reconverge the longitudinal waves at a conjugate angle, and they resynthesize a transverse wave, because you phase conjugate back. And the transverse waves will make heat. The longitudinal won't. So that creates heat containment at a distance. In what Tom Bearden called the Russian woodpecker. You can see all of the Tom Bearden papers on creating longitudinal and plasma containment at fractalfield.com/mathematics of fusion. But this is how the flame in the mind works. This is how you control compression at a distance. This is the key to psychokinesis. This is the key to healing fields. This moves towards our advanced course now about how you resynthesize transverse from longitudinal, and thus can hold heat at a distance and build a flame with your mind, and how you would then send love by creating this possibility of embedding and focusing energy at a distance. So you see, this conversation would get quite advanced. Now, we're going to leave some of that for the next course here. I see we have about 15 minutes left in the formal presentation, and then we're going to do dialogue here. So we're going to get to some of the more subtle advanced nature of this, like stargates and Dharana, and how plasma projection defines shamanism, how the ancients used these things because they recognized, for example, we think that Akhenaten got an assignment essentially from the Syrians, Enki Hermes' mother's bloodline, which was to build Dharana. Anton Parks called it Dharana, Stargate, and plasma projection. The real meaning of Jerusalem, a temple in which to project charge. Because you take your plasma ball, and if you don't project it through the speed of light, through the heart of the sun, then basically there's no way out of kindergarten. So anyway, he gets this assignment, build this Amenti Amarna, this Stargate, and he fails. He screws up the checkbook, runs for his life, changes his name to Moses, becomes a gold powder cook, and it's kind of downhill from there. So somebody needs to build the right kind of Stargate, because otherwise, unfortunately, soul groups can't project their bliss, their cocoon, their plasma, and otherwise there's no way out of kindergarten. So, but this is a bit advanced, a bit esoteric, a bit requires some understanding of shamanism, etc. So we're going to leave that conversation now and pursue it in the more advanced course. And then we're going to pursue the plasma healing conversation in this course. We have a course at Fractal U on advanced plasma healing, which is primarily about our Prairie plasma device, Therify.net. And Paul here is going to be playing with us on that occasion. Paul came all the way over here from Canada. We've been installing these devices. Belgium one went great, and we do South France tomorrow. But the last few minutes of the formal presentation here, I wanted to just review more of the kind of solid science. I just want to check to see if I haven't missed key questions here in the chat window. Okay. So the other pieces of hard evidence for this phase conjugate theory of all negentropic and centripetal forces. I mean, you know, at a minimum, what I wanted to do in this course tonight was present the hard evidence, the evidence that I say is not easy to argue or contravene. For example, here are the exact frequencies of heart rate variability, HRV, LF, and HF. It turns out that these two classic peaks, remember, everyone's heart rate on the planet seems to agree on one thing, LF and HF, heart rate variability, low frequency, high frequency. And those two frequencies, 0.959, which is really 0.1 hertz, called the Meyer wave, and 0.251, guess what? Almost exact or exact golden ratio times Planck time. So the heart is using phase conjugate negative negentropic collapse. Now down here we have the exact frequency wavelength associated with adenosine diphosphate to diphosphate. If any of you know any real biophysics, you know that all cellular energy transactions are mediated by ADP to ATP, adenosine diphosphate to adenosine triphosphate. It's like the universal dollar bill currency of all energy transactions inside your cell. And that frequency, by the way, is how Bob Dratch measured Kundalini in the microwave, because your body is radiating mitogenic radiation at that frequency. It's DNA radio, it's the physics of telepathy. Again, we'll go into that in advanced courses, but microwave cellular radiation we can prove is a major part of how telepathy works. So ADP, here's the wavelength right here in this picture, 1.9 nanometers. Sorry, you see the top of my balding head as I lean over. But no, in other words, if you take Planck length times golden ratio, exponents exactly, you get this 1.936 nanometer length, which almost exactly predicts the wavelength of ADP ATP. In other words, the microwave frequencies of ADP ATP, cellular metabolism, is phase conjugate implosive collapse wave. Later, when we explain the physics of cancer, how the caduceus going toward short wavelengths, high quality ultraviolet light, is what the phase conjugation pump wave collapse in the Priori device, which he proved was so successful in cancer cure, because it provides a way out for that high quality UV light from the cell. Because if the cell builds this high frequency coherence, the UV sex juice, the high quality blue UV light, and there's no place to put it, then of course it has to drive meiosis, mitosis, the physics of cancer, the premature replication. Whereas if there's a way out for that high frequency phase conjugate, normally permission to touch, contact inhibition, then there's no cancer because there's no UV, which has to drive premature replication. And here, finally, well, there was a couple other examples. Again, we're presenting the hard data here. On the top, we have the frequencies of LF and HF in this chart of phase conjugation based on Planck time. This is fractality in time. And here on the bottom, we have the known frequencies of the sacrocranial pump wave. Remember, if your spine liquid is pumping, it's clinically impossible to be depressed. That's Upledger's work. And the spine liquid pump frequency is called the tidal. Look at that. They fit this chart beautifully. And later we see that fits the chart from Bentov. Oh, here we have Bentov's chart. Here's the frequencies heard in the ears of meditators who had bliss, called Sangra, Song in the Blood, Physics of Kundalini. Bentov proved you phase lock the spine liquid pump with the ventricle liquids, you get horny. You conserve your sex juices. And that ringing frequencies in the ears heard by meditators, he graphed right here. And we see that many of the frequencies in that cascade also are phase conjugate implosive pump wave. Now, elsewhere in this article, we show that the almost exact duration of the Earth year and Venus year fit Planck time times integer exponent Golden ratio. Also, in other words, Earth-Venus orbit. You know, the Venus orbit is so pentagonal, reverse retrograde implosive. And the Venus orbit, Venus is getting so much brighter, and Anton Park says, Enki Osiris is coming back in the orbit of Venus. Well, that's a good place to incarnate because you can embed your plasma there. It's implosive. Fractality in time. So this is the graph here from the intro to Therify.net, showing what I believe is a useful metaphor for cellular biophysics, that the food protein changes that are come into the cell metabolism at a relatively long wavelength, and the cell massages the energy centers toward shorter and shorter, more coherent light inside the cell, toward DNA precursors, and finally toward the high quality coherent UV light, blue fire sex juice, which is the motor of replication. So as the cell produces that high quality blue UV light, if the cell is a sphere and therefore cancer, it means it doesn't respond to touch, which how you define cancer, contact inhibition, means the UV is not getting properly propagated in permission to touch across a softened membrane. The membrane gets too hard and too spherical, no way out for the UV, and that's called cancer because the UV coherence drives meiosis, mitosis. Whereas if we take a phase conjugate pump wave called the Therify, and we provide that implosive path through center, Planck dimensions, a way out for the high frequencies, then obviously that's centripetal, anti-swelling, anti-tumor, anti-cyst, etc., which is what Priori proved, and we're just beginning to clinically replicate and having great success so far in very preliminary results, Therify.net. But see how beautiful this caduceus cascade model is applied to understanding cell metabolism and issues like cancer. Okay, let's step back now. So it's about 9 minutes before 10. And look at what was the curriculum for this evening's course. See how far we did. So 3 was understanding cosmic gravity. 4 was a review of the book, particularly how fractality space and time was. 5 was review of the key physics of the cause of gravity in the conjugate gravity article. We did that pretty well. 6 was review of the key wave mechanics, the wave equations from mathematics of fusion. We did that early in tonight's conversation. 7 was physical implications of restored negentropy in any system using the new equation of self-organization, examples. Okay, let's spend the last few minutes on that one. So examples of restoring negentropy. In other words, okay, this is cool. You have a new theory of reorganizing anything. Let's present some examples. So an example we just discussed was the Therify, the plasma healing system, that if you do this frequency recipe, profoundly broad spectral phase conjugation, sometimes called harmonic inclusiveness, predicts vitality of anything. And harmonic inclusiveness requires golden ratio phase conjugation to allow sustainability, defining sustainability, because it allows constructive interference. So for example, we know in bioacoustic habitat theory, the more harmonics the better in a forest, the more the forest has an immune system. We know from HRV, heart rate variability studies, Irving Dardick and others, that harmonic inclusiveness is what you measure in your heart rate variability to decide if you have an immune system. Your heart rate's making just one frequency, you're toast. If your heart's making a complete harmonic cascade, you're healthy. It's very simple. It's called harmonic inclusiveness predicts vitality. It applies to every living thing in the galaxy. In fact, it applies to everything in the galaxy. In my view, everything in the universe, it has its sustainability predicted by its harmonic inclusiveness, and harmonic inclusiveness climax optimized is phase conjugation optimized by golden ratio. For example, in a hologram, every node contains information about all nodes because of perfect compression. So holograms are held together by coherence. Phase conjugation, in my view, is the climax form of coherence in wave mathematics. Other practical examples. We talked about photosynthesis. Now we know why the frequencies of photosynthesis work, because they're precisely phase conjugate to Planck time, implosive collapse. So now we know why, if you put exactly those frequencies in a glass, you make bioactive glass. Myron glass people have started this. We intend to perfect that and make far more bioactive glass, high dielectric and precisely phase conjugate to optical colors. All of that is described where we summarize all of our bioactive field projects at bioactivefield.com. And there will be a course here at Fractal U on all the various bioactive field projects, including bioactive glass, bioactive architecture, bioactive cement, bioactive clothing, bioactive refrigerators, bioactive plasma. The links are all there at bioactivefield.com. So we now know why you could get the right frequencies into your child's classroom to make attention. We know you take the poisonous fluorescent light out and you install sunlight. You measure a dramatic increase in attention span. That's wonderful work by Professor John Ott, book Health and Light. But further now, we can actually make the capacitance, the optics, everything correct in the environment to produce the possibility of attention span, because we know what attention is. And finally, I see there's 5 minutes left and my throat's getting a little tired. I got too enthused. Let's talk about the Schumann harmonics. Remember, we showed the chart here, again, the back cover of my book. Here's the cascade of harmonics of golden ratio, and here is the Schumann harmonics, almost an exact match. So if you take the frequency signature of the Schumann harmonic series, and we think, unfortunately, that Greg Braden might have been a little confused to say it's increasing in frequency. Actually, what's happening, the Schumann harmonic cascade is relatively stable by power spectra, but it's increasing in harmonic inclusiveness. A practical example. In the book 2/3 by Myers and Percy, they said the ancients called the pyramid the Hummer. Our friend Sam of the Bosnian pyramids has been attracting 500,000 tourists a year now because people who come there get rejuvenated. Hello, they're beginning to figure out why. The low frequencies of the Schumann harmonic cascade there is more healthy and more coherent. You know, Schumann harmonics exist in nature. Unfortunately, in cities, oops, cities were a mistake. Maybe the inventor should apologize. I'm kidding. But in nature, Schumann harmonics are still there. And Sam measured the infrasound low frequencies, and the Schumann harmonics are held there. because the pyramids are on these nodes, and so the pyramid is humming. And why is it humming? Well, he measured the layers down below, and sure enough, the layers are alternative layers of clay, high dielectric, shungite, super high dielectric, phase conjugate dielectric, and quartz, calcite, high piezo. You make those layers, you can call it orgone, I call it phase conjugate dielectric. What does that mean? How does that make the pyramid a rejuvenator for biology? It's humming with the low frequencies and the infrasound. It's making these plasma balls, like the holy light in Jerusalem, and it's rejuvenating people. Well, guess what? You take a condenser, a capacitor, which is a conjugate dielectric. I guess we need to say what a conjugate dielectric is. Let's try to do this briefly. You see, why is the dielectric constant important? What is the dielectric constant? Electrically, in a sense, every living thing is a capacitor. It's called a condenser. In a sense, all circuits have a bit of capacitance, capacity to store charge, and they're called capacitors. Well, capacitors classically two conductors, and between them, the two plates, you have an insulator. And the quality of that insulator's ability to allow that capacitor to ring like a bell efficiently is called the dielectric constant. So you hit a capacitor with a hammer called voltage, and you listen to how it rings. And if it rings forever, then it has a high dielectric constant. That is to say, the efficiency of how it rings. Now, the cool thing is that if the dielectric constant of a capacitor is high enough, it means by definition that that capacitor is ringing with more energy than the hammer or voltage you hit it with. In other words, it's getting power from the vacuum. Hello, fun stuff. We know that pine cones and chicken eggs get about 2 to 12 millivolts from somewhere. I think that's called vacuum coherence, and that pine cones and chicken eggs are vacuum cohering zero-point energy devices. That's my opinion. And my opinion is that is the definition of life, ability to extract charge from the vacuum. So, your clothing in your house need to have a certain dielectric constant because otherwise, your aura can't ring like a bell, your aura can't breathe, your aura can't unpack, and you can't propagate your charge. Therefore, your aura weakens. This means that children who go to school in steel and aluminum buildings have a problem. Their aura is not going to be able to unpack. So, I think it's helpful for people to understand what dielectric constant is because it's key to life force. In fact, it's key to the definition of biologic architecture, which just happens to be another course coming up at fractalu.com. So what it means in practice is, and this is the last joke for tonight's course. No, that every molecule that wanted to join this very fun club called life has read my bumper sticker, which says "Get fractal or get dead," because molecules that want to be part of life rearrange themselves into fractality called clathrates and conjugators and monoatomics so that they can achieve charge distribution efficiency, mean ring like a bell efficiently, mean convey waves efficiently, mean convey the collective mind efficiently. So that's why every living protein that wanted to join the club called life gets rearranged more fractally, clathrates and conjugators, etc. And so that's why you need living materials in your clothing and in your house, because the capacitance is efficient enough to allow your aura to ring and be plasma projected. Now we're going to take this to a very esoteric level later and apply this to the design of temple and how you project your aura through stars from the right apertures on the pyramid and lots of cool stuff. But understanding some of the basic terminology of these conversations, like plasma projection, dielectric constant, longitudinal versus transverse. This was the basic goal of tonight's conversation. So I see that it is after 10 o'clock, and my throat is getting a little bit tired here, although I can do a little bit more. And we had said that the last half hour would be open dialogue and questions. Here we have something coming up in the chat window. Cool. Bob Beck's biotuner is said to have a setting which produces Schumann harmonics. If this is true, would this produce phase conjugate implosive collapse and thus longitudinal waves? Well, I had the privilege of playing with Bob Beck, and I liked him a lot. He was a great guy. Actually, my my peak experience with Bob Beck was at the Psychotronics conference. We had brought Marcel Vogel. We had all kinds of fun there. And Bob Beck took his Bic 19-cent pen and held it by the plastic and rubbed the metal ring on top in his hair, charging it with a little bit of capacitance. And then he took that pen and he waved it in the air at approximately 8 hertz. And sure enough, the whole room was swept with a wave of bliss, euphoria. Everyone had a short-term wave of bliss. That's true. I was there. It was cool. And Bob Beck pointed out, I learned from him, we started doing this, so we took a sheet of aluminum foil on the ceiling and the floor, and we put about 8 hertz in it. And we learned that if you put like 20 millivolts into those 2 sheets of aluminum, one on the floor and one on the ceiling of an auditorium, you could send a wave of euphoria through the auditorium. However, if you put like 20 volts into the same sheets of aluminum, no euphoria. You know why? Because the body was programmed to want a low voltage embedding in the Schumann harmonic series to get this wave of euphoria and bliss. Now, what Bob Beck didn't know was that the harmonic content of the Schumann series is actually a more complex waveform. The actual harmonics in the Schumann harmonic, 8 hertz is only, it's 3 hertz, 7.83, 14.3, and 20.8. You combine those waves into a complex wave like Therify.net, our plasma system, then you get much stronger euphoria and bliss, and truly most people do have euphoria and bliss experiences in that plasma device. So my hypothesis would be that Bob's production of Schumann harmonics was probably not a completely disciplined, phase-accurate, complex wave. We now know how to perfect that principle. And that was one of the final things I wanted to point out in this course, is that now that we know how to make the perfect Schumann harmonic cascade, we can fix it. When Lovelock said that Gaia is self-organizing, that she keeps a narrow window of pressure and moisture and temperature and all this cool stuff, that Gaia seems to be self-organizing. Now we know exactly why. We could take our planet and cause it to emerge from chaos systematically by fixing the Schumann harmonic cascade. I am emphatic about that. We know that, when a highway engineer cuts a major Earth magnetic line, your local climate goes to chaos. That's old news. You deserve the tornadoes that result, because you can't steer a tornado unless you can create conjugate embedding. So now we even know how to install the magnetic devices to fix the Schumann harmonic series to make Earth more self-organizing. Literally, to restore the planet from chaos. We always knew the pyramids had to be at magnetic ley line crosses, but now we know exactly why. We knew the cozy of mirrors had to be installed where the magnetic lines had a critical amount of nanotesla because the flux line crosses had to work, etc., etc. Okay, we're getting another question. This is good. Gary Clark says, what is your take on Keshe? You mentioned he is clairvoyant. He seems to know a lot. His plasma generator product looks like a scam, endless product. Yeah, Cassie. What is your take on Keshe and his amazing blue box? Well, what a coincidence. We're just involved in that process. Little background. On one of the two occasions when we were invited to Dr. Keshe's living room at Garda, we took with us Europe's leading cold fusion physicist, Jean-Paul Biberian. And we had the opportunity to do some chemical analysis on his monoatomics. And we made a series of films about our work with Keshe at that time. Fractalfield.com/cold plasma, which was the film interview I did about Keshe's work with Keshe's lead publisher, one of his publishers, our good friend from New Zealand, Cornelius Van Dorp here. And that film went somewhat viral. All that being said, it's clear that Dr. Keshe has unfortunately not been able to communicate well in electrical engineering terms, and has made promises that he's not kept at various times. And I have no judgment about that. And Keshe's use of the language, he's perfectly combined dark matter with antimatter. I think that's unfortunate and useless language. So Dr. Keshe has a great background in nuclear science, but as an electrical communicator, I think, there's issues there. But oh well, let's not be critical. I think, in fact, I'm emphatic that the core principle is wonderful. He gets a critical temperature and caustic liquid to vapor deposit monoatomics on certain surfaces and conductive surfaces. I know for sure this is real and wonderful. Our partners in Keshe's group, Brett and now Armin, who's one of his leaders, we've been working with them for a long time, and Brett is doing the monoatomic coatings for the imploder.com implosion nozzle, and they work. They're powerful. They're an option. They'll be on the website soon. You check it out. A monoatomic coating on a vortex nozzle for water. This thing is psychoactive, very powerful. So these monoatomic coatings, they're useful and powerful, similar to monoatomic layers of carbon, carbon nanotubes, etc., because they're waveguide, superconductive, because they create a channel integral to the wavelength of the electron itself. So monoatomics, wonderful, useful, powerful stuff. Now, ability to communicate the electrical engineering, no, but that's okay. Keshe has assembled this world team of people that are playing with this, which is kind of cool, and they will learn more electrical engineering in time. Now, to answer your specific question, Brett and Armin have come to us and said, we are now setting up manufacturing facilities around the world. We said, oh, cool, we see your blue capacitor-like device. We know it's a monoatomic thing, and we don't know all the details. But Armin, who is one of Keshe's leading assemblers of these devices, is bringing the prototype on November 9 to our conference of physicists, and our lead engineer at a meeting we're having in Los Angeles. And we have assembled various of our teams around the world, and the two engineers will do the evaluation, independent third-party evaluation of the prototype that will be there, if obviously. And we haven't taken a lot of risk, but we're flying in the right people. And we understand, for example, the 2 to 4 kilowatt nominal output is initially limited, but as the superconductive monoatomic coating propagates, the output increases. And also, initially, the output is limited to resistive and only later to reactive loads. And we think we understand why. So there's a lot to these things, and there's some great parallels to what Bedini was doing with the reciprocating battery circuit, and also to the charge shuttle oscillator from Tesla. So short story made long that we're continuing to talk and negotiate with those people, and we have our centers from the Implosion Group and the Imploder.com around the world that are on standby to begin producing a variety of these devices using our core engineer consultants, including wonderfully Mark and Paul and others who will be at the meetings there with the Keshe team. So in short, stay tuned. There's something real there, and the core concept is clearly real, and so we hope to have more news soon. Okay, next question. Mark Rohrbar says, Mark, knowing how now the cause of gravity, what approach would be used to create anti-gravity? I'm going to pour a little bit more tea in honor of that question. In short, our preliminary work in that direction is summarized at fractalfield.com/propulsion. And again, I would credit Bill Donovan, now Elizabeth, for a lot of that work, and I'm hoping that we get to continue some of that. But basically, we learned some things. I could bring up the images here, but it's getting late, so we'll just talk about it. But you could go to fractalfield.com/propulsion, during this conversation. And actually, below in that article, there's 2 key PDFs, which I'm going to refer to now. One of them called hydraulic propulsion, the other is solid state or crystal propulsion based on Koski-Frost. So in summary, let me try to, actually maybe I will bring up one of those pictures. 1 second. Fractal.com/propulsion. This here fun story, and I guess Mark is humoring me by bringing up one of my favorite stories here. So if you take, I've got an image on the screen here from that article /propulsion. I'm waiting for it to come up on your screen. But if you take this golden spiral here, called optimized translation of vorticity, which is depicted here in this picture, which I'm hoping is going to come up on your screen momentarily, which is called the Anu and related to the spiral and the torus. But if you take this spiral and you look at the this spiral shadows indexed by the symmetry of the tetrahedron, you have Hebrew and Sanskrit, which is enabling you to tilt the charge domain donut that is your optical cortex at the critical tetracubic angles to phase conjugate. And so what you're doing is you're producing propulsion. And this is what I would like to try to explain now in response to Mark's question. We believe the physics is that if you translate vorticity in the correct angle of a spiral on a torus, you produce gravity. And the example I would give, I believe, when Bill discovered that he had a certain hydraulic machine where the tubing hydraulics in that machine approximated this slip knot, every time you turned that hydraulic machine on, it would jump off the floor. And Bill Donovan began to study that, and he concluded that there was a way to optimize this process and produce gravity. And we now believe the next thing Bill did, and I guess you'll see some of that at the link. It looks like the share screen is not updating very well here tonight, but that's okay. Bill began studying the engineering prints for something called the Vimana in the Vedas. The Vimana was described, the flying UFO craft in the Veda, was described with enough accuracy in the Veda that an engineer could evaluate the descriptions and produce the device. And we believe actually that's what the Germans did with the Nazi Bell, the Glocke. And so then we took a $1,000 2-horsepower pump and produced a couple of grams of gravity by, oh yeah, there's your screen refresh there. It's a little slow, but it's going. So there's that spiral on that donut there. Let's see if that's going to show up here. Yeah, see the spiral on the torus there? So, and by the way, that's key to physics of magic, to throw the donuts of your brain. If you converge them accurately at a distance, this is called casting a spell and blowing the doors off a church, and what John Dee learned to call angels and all kinds of cool stuff. It's described here in this article. So, at the bottom of this article, fractalfield.com/propulsion, you'll see the equations we wrote because we knew that you needed high inertia to move on exact trajectory spiral on the torus to the point where you could carry your own inertial velocity, carry your own inertial field with you, and so you wouldn't feel the turn on the subway, actually. Quite real, how the UFOs do it. This is what's called impulse power as opposed to warp on Star Trek. The impulse power was the impulse of this inertia traveling on the torus. Well, then we talked to this other physicist who says, oh, I didn't need a $1,000 2-horsepower pump. I used an aquarium pump. And we said, well, how did you do that? And he said, well, what you need is liquid mercury, which we know the Nazis in the Vimana probably used. And I think there's other things used, but it had high inertia. But then they used a wetting agent so that the iron powder could be soluble in the mercury, and it turned purple, and the Nazis used a purple liquid. So now you have powerful magnetic flux inertia in the same trajectory as the high liquid specific gravity and inertia. And you get very highly efficient production of propulsion, how the Vimana flew. And you see the equations for that based on the Navier-Stokes equations and the work our mathematician, again, Martin Jones, did on that in the PDFs at the bottom of this article, fractalfield.com/propulsion, where you can actually do the mathematics to predict how to wind these things accurately produce gravity. So this is, crude propulsion called impulse drive. Now, the more advanced drive, and I'm talking about Star Trek here as if it's physics, because some of it is. No, the lithium, they call it dilithium crystals, but it's actually the conjugator lithium niobate. And if you take a highly conjugate crystal And the original experiment is called Koski-Frost, and Bill did half a lifetime study on this. And this is the second PDF here at this article, goldmean.com/fractalfield.com/propulsion. And it has all of Koski-Frost information. Basically, you got a quartz crystal cube. It's piezo. It's accurate molecular plane to facet plane alignment. And you pump a highly coherent broad spectral phase conjugate pump wave into this crystal. And at the Bell Labs, they proved that it produced 800 times its own weight in gravity. It appears the U.S. government went to a lot of trouble to eliminate all the Koski-Frost documentation from every university in the country. It was so dangerous. Oh well, you know, every sharp knife has two sides. So the physics is that phase conjugate pump wave into a rotating conjugator produces lift. Now that's it takes a little bit of thinking about, but the conjugator is rotating because the piezo quartz cube is helical in its z-axis optically, which means that's a rotating conjugator. Another example of that is when Keshe rotates a monoatomic in the Keshe reactor, the rotating conjugator produces lift. And I was there, and they showed me a measurement of some lift produced, et cetera, et cetera. So that's another reason why I know that's real. So those are some examples of understanding how we could use this phase conjugate model of gravity to produce propulsion, which is why we joked on Facebook and said, well, if NASA knew why an object falls to the ground, then they could design lift. Next question. Okay. No, so we have a pretty good start on that. A hand up. Yes, Lisa, if you have a question, maybe you want to type it in or say it. That's fine. Ted Edwards, question. Yes, we can hear you, Lisa. Go ahead. Yes.
Getting back to basics, and let me see if I get my terminology correct, because this is the first time this terminology is coming out of my mouth. We talked about hydrogen and how phase conjugation is the mechanism for creating gravity.
Yes, we did.
So the inertia of those waves is what creates the mass of the hydrogen.
Well, it's really quite, when charge is going in a circle, it stores inertia, and that's called mass for all atoms. But we proved specifically that that's right. But what we proved specifically is that the golden spiral is present in the charge trajectory in hydrogen radii, and that's evidence that the way hydrogen is producing gravity is by phase conjugating by golden ratio between electron shells, producing charge acceleration towards center called gravity. Is that helpful? Or?
Yes, and so it is the waves that precede the gravity. I mean, the waves that precede the mass, or the creation of the waves precedes the creation of the mass. Is that making sense, what I'm saying?
Well, remember, mass is only rotating charge. So the only thing we can really talk about here is waves of charge. And when the waves of charge stand in a circle rotating, we call that mass. Bit of an illusion. What's actually real is the wave of charge, which is simply compression and rarefaction of the ether, which is compressible. Is that helpful?
Yes, second question. You were talking about Dr. Kareem and about
green.
And if I remember from biogeometry, there's horizontal negative green and vertical negative green. Now, is one of those a longitudinal wave and the other a transverse wave?
Well, we're suggesting that the actual frequency of green optically is opposite to a conjugator, so not very helpful to producing longitudinal. But on the other hand, we are saying that green represents a perfect 90-degree phase angle of the torus photon. So saying there's a vertical and horizontal component would be very real. I had that conversation with Dr. Kareem when we did a lecture together, I think it was in Netherlands. And, you know, he said, we can kill some with negative green. I said, yes, but that doesn't mean you understand it.
Thank you.
Ted Edwards is asking a question. Thank you, Lisa. We could pursue that, but I think the key thing is eventually we'll prove when we understand better how phase conjugation causes color, we'll understand why plants cannot eat the green photon, and that's very profound. Okay, Ted Edwards' question. When using Heart's Ring app, the breathing is guiding the brainwave produced. How does this relate to producing bliss Total forgiveness and unconditional love. Well, heartsring.com is somebody whistling? Okay. Um, Getting some feedback. Heartsring.com is just undergoing a major product upgrade, and in the new version, you'll actually be able to see the relationship to sacrocranial pulse. Oh.
Oops.
In the new version, you'll actually be able to see the sacrocranial harmonics in the LFHF, because we have much new information now that the Meyer wave
He doesn't have his mic on.
Tell him. Okay. It's all right. You don't know?
No? Looks like
There's a refreshment.
sorry about that. Can you hear me now? Hello?
There was. Hi, sorry, there was an ADSL crash. Ah, you can hear me now, huh? Yeah, I much apologize for that crash. I guess this will have to be continued when we get to the biofeedback part of the course. But at least we got most, except for the last 5 minutes. Any closing? Well, thank you for your patience and enthusiasm. And we'll make an HRV for Android devices. Thank you, Jane. Initially, we're going to do a major new upgrade for iOS, and that'll be released within a month or two. The Android is intended, but that's going to take longer. Thank you. And thanks for your encouragement, Jane, and help everybody. Eventually, this becomes kind of a global network of people who understand these things, the fractal field theory, and we work together to really develop this into something compelling for the world. I'm appreciative of the people who have technical background like Mark and Jane's friends and everybody to put this together into something that creates a global momentum. So thank you very much. Any final questions or thoughts? Mention a combination of substance clays. Would there be a specific combination of things particularly used in the body itself, bentonite clay? Well, you know, the dielectric constant inside the body is very critical also. You know, like the monoatomics and the monatomic gold. Next time, I think we will talk about the way we're using monoatomic hydrogen. We have a fabulous new monoatomic hydrogen product, which is just incredible. With it, you know, the relationship to free radical scavenger and monoatomic hydrogen. Let's see if I can find that link. It's called. What's Victor's website? Yeah, I can't find the bottle here. Where'd it go? But anyway, there's a new version of monoatomic hydrogen, which, oh, here it is. Okay, the website is primonutra.com, and the product is Primo H, a new version of monoatomic hydrogen, extreme free radical scavenger, amazing stuff, a real rejuvenation, and in synergy with Imploder Spa, and we'll talk about that more in the water section. But the imploderspa.com is now fountainoflife.today, and you'll be hearing more about that, where you use the spa environment with the hydrogen. Okay, any thoughts about the U.S. secret space program, people on Mars, etc.? I don't think I have any major insight in that, other than to say I really believed Ingo Swann's experiences on the dark side of the moon, and I do believe many sources who indicate the Dracos have inhabited Mars for a very long time. And so many of our probes to Mars got wiped out by the same Draco-Uru culture that we write about in the Fusion in the Blood. Fractalfield.com/fusion in the blood is my version of the ET influence story, and we have a course here coming up on that. So more to come on that conversation, Fusion in the Blood. But I believe that conversation about the Draco-Uru and their presence on Mars would relate to your question about the U.S. secret space program. But that being said, I'm not a real conspiracy theory buff. I think, you know, let's be very practical and collect real evidence. Okay, Tufan, thank you for your encouragement, everybody. And maybe we'll call it a night. We're going to make this recording available. And thank you for your encouragement. And feel free to join us in the other courses and send me a note of your requests and involvement. info@fractalfield.com. Blessings, sweet dreams, everyone. Thank you, Jane. Blessings. Thanks for coming and for your patience. And sorry we had a little glitch there. Bye-bye. See you.